Do you recognise the Prime Minister as incapable, uncertain, weak and lacking in the qualities of leadership the country needs?
No, I think Rishi Sunak is a capable guy who's been given a very difficult situation. And, I was obviously involved in the Liz Truss government. I was Chancellor. The markets were rocking. And he came in unexpectedly, actually. I don't think he thought that he was going to necessarily become Prime Minister. And he has steadied the ship. I'm very pleased to see the inflation target has been met. And I don't recognise those words.
What does he do to try and restore calm and order?
I think it's very difficult because you've obviously got people on the right of the party who are sceptical and slightly concerned about the latest appointments and the sacking of Suella. And I think he's tried to reach out to them by appointing Esther McVey. And he's got to be very clear, and I've said this about David Cameron as well, they've got to be very clear on Brexit. They've got to be very clear about the fact that we're moving forward, we're not moving back. And we've got to try and bring as many people along with us as possible.
Well, that's interesting. You said, do you sense there is a fear that people will feel you're moving, the government is moving back?
Well, I just feel that the optics of bringing back David Cameron, who hasn't been in the House of Commons for 7 years, let alone government, I think a lot of people thought that was a backward step. I happen to think David Cameron's very capable. I think he's a likeable, clever and focused man. He does bring heft and experience. But again, it's all about the symbols, isn't it? It's all about, a lot of it is about what sort of signal you're giving, what sort of reassurance you're giving to voters. And people, particularly Brexiteers, remember him as the man who campaigned for Remain.
We'll come more on Lord Cameron in a moment. Just coming back to Suella Braverman, did she have to go?
I think she had to go. I mean, I was conflicted on this.
I mean, you must know her well. She was Home Secretary when you were Chancellor. So
yeah, and she was...
I mean, how effective is she?
I think she's very stubborn and very determined. I don't know any of the conversations she had with Rishi Sunak. I mean, she talks about them extensively in the letter.
Well, she says she's been betrayed.
And look, I don't know what the...
neither of us do.
It read like a sort of a relationship breakup. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. She seems very, very hurt by her dismissal. But I think publicly she was off piste. She was too much off piste.
And is that the article in the Times specifically, or
yes,
also homelessness is a lifestyle issue?
The homelessness is a lifestyle. I mean, I tend to be on the right, as you know,
yes,
of the party. But the homelessness is a lifestyle choice was quite a bold statement, which I didn't agree with. And I'm not quite sure why she had to be public about that. And then, of course, on the police, I've been a Secretary of State. You've got to deal well. You've got to deal respectfully with the people, your stakeholders. So if you're a Home Secretary, you've got to have a good relationship with the Metropolitan Police. So to publicly to call them out on that, again, was quite punchy.
How much did she inflame tensions prior to last Saturday?
I don't think she did. I mean, I think the people who wanted to cause aggravation and mischief were set on that in any case. I don't think she, in the words she said or wrote, inflamed the situation. But I think she had stepped out of line as far as the Prime Minister was concerned, clearly. And that's why she was dismissed.
Just lastly on the idea of homelessness as a lifestyle choice, you said it was bold. It's worse than that, isn't it? It's offensive, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's true. And I think, for some people it might be, but it's clearly not the case for everybody who's on the streets. And it was an odd and offensive remark.
Coming back to Lord Cameron, you'll recall in 2016 you described his failing over Brexit as a greater embarrassment than Suez was for Anthony Eden.
I'd forgotten I said that, thank you.
That's why I'm here to help, Kwasi. In the light of that, how appropriate is it? He's the Foreign Secretary.
So look, I always, given my experience as a government, I always believe there's a way back. I think there's always redemption, if you like, that is possible. I think it was odd at this moment to bring him back. I also feel that it looks... I understand Rishi's, what Rishi's trying to do, but it does look slightly desperate, going back to someone who's been out of office and out of Parliament even for 7 years. And then bringing him back. And I also thought that James Cleverly was doing a good job. And that's one of the problems we've got. We've got this endless churn. So everyone said James Cleverly's doing a good job. So what do? We move him after a year to another job. And I think that was odd to me. But I'm sure David will do it. Will be a credit to the government.
How electable are the Conservatives?
I think we need to look. I'd say a couple of things about this. At the moment, it seems very difficult to see how we get back. However, the election doesn't have to happen for another year. And you and I have gone through these elections. I mean, I remember 2017. We were sure as hell going to win a huge majority. And then that totally collapsed. In 7 or 8 weeks, that lead of 20 points collapsed to 2. Again, in 2015, nobody thought we'd get a majority, and we got a majority. So, and nobody thought Brexit would happen, did they? And we had Brexit. So it's very difficult to say for certain what will actually happen, and a lot can change in a year. But from what we see now, it is very challenging.
Coming back to David Cameron, you've obviously worked very closely with Liz Truss. The former Prime Minister saw China as a threat. Lord Cameron, of course, has very close links. We took President Xi for a pint of beer. Who's right on China?
So on China, I've always been less hawkish than people like Liz Truss, because China's a fact of life. I mean, we can't wish it away. We can't close our eyes and pretend that it's disappeared. And it's got 1.4 billion people. Its economy has been growing, over the last 30 years, much greater than any other economy in the world. And we have to engage with China. If we're a serious power, a serious country, we have to engage with China. It doesn't mean we follow everything they do or kowtow, to use that Chinese expression, to them. But we have to engage. We can't simply just cut them off. And I think that David Cameron is quite pragmatic about it. And I'm sure he's embarrassed about the whole, having pints of bitter, I think it was, with Xi. And Xi, if you look at the picture, he clearly wasn't enjoying
Don't
the
think
bitter.
he liked the beer either.
I don't think he liked it.
Reminding you were business secretary at a very tough time, post-pandemic.
Yes.
You helped lead the country.
Yes.
How big a deal is the Florida Pact that was signed yesterday?
I think look, any deal is a good deal. I mean, not any deal is a good deal, but any deal with a state like Florida, which shares...
It's a Spanish-style economy in Florida.
Well, it's a very dynamic economy. And Ron DeSantis, although his presidential campaign hasn't gone brilliantly, he has been an effective governor of the state, and he's attracting investment. And I think it's a good deal. It's a good way, I think, of approaching deals with the US, where you're dealing with actually big states, big economically powerful states.
We're working our way around the government. How do you rate Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor?
I think I did the job. We tried to do one thing. I was sacked, if you remember.
I do.
And actually what people forget was that Jeremy was appointed by Liz. He wasn't appointed by Rishi. And I think Rishi has taken the right view that to move a chancellor now would be destabilising. So I think that it's a kind of pact of mutual convenience. And I think he's doing a steady job.
What does he need to do in the November statement?
So my view, and I suspect they won't do this in the November statement, but they might do this in the budget ahead of an election next year. I think there's got to be some indication or some actual reduction in the tax burden, because I can't see the Tories going in saying, "Oh, we're going to put up your taxes" into an election. I mean, that would be ruinous for the Conservative Party. So who knows?
Which would you look at? Where would you focus your attention?
Well, I think they would probably be looking at personal taxation, potentially. Things like the basic rate, but I'm speculating.
Yeah.
I haven't been in government for a year now, so I can't tell you exactly what they're going to be looking at. People float inheritance tax, but inheritance tax affects actually not that many people. If you want to have an offer that most people can benefit from, you would look at the basic rate.
All right, triple lock.
I don't think they'll touch the triple lock. I mean, it's expensive. But inflation's coming down, and that's one of the elements of the triple lock, and it directly affects pensioners who traditionally, on the whole, have voted Tory.
What's the biggest difference from serving within a government at the level of Chancellor of the Exchequer and being an MP?
Oh, it's a huge difference. I mean, for a start, if you're a Secretary of State, if you're a cabinet minister, you have huge support. So you've got a private office. In the civil service, you've got a driver, you've got a whole retinue of people who are supporting you, and it's a constant pressure. And when you're reading the newspapers, you think, okay, what's going on? What am I responsible for? You've got a very active engagement with what's going on. And as a backbencher, you can hold the government to account. So one of the things I've done as a backbencher, a couple of things, is have Westminster Hall debates. Debates about things like sudden unexplained death in children. You can champion causes in a way that it's very difficult. Well, you can't really as a minister.
No, which makes you happier?
It's a lot less stressful not being, in the very centre of government. But again, there's a kind of adrenaline rush. And you probably know that in your work.
Yep.
You're very, very involved. You're trying to do the best for your country. I remember one great Liberal Democrat friend of mine said it's the political equivalent of playing for England if you're in the cabinet. I'm not quite sure it's perhaps the right analogy. You have to choose which sport to compare it to.
Yeah, not cricket.
But it's hugely fulfilling and exciting. But it's a totally different life, actually, to one in the backbenches. But the backbenches, you've got much more flexibility. And as I say, you can hold the government to account. You can have debates. You can champion issues that are dear to you or your constituents.
We've talked a lot about the Conservatives. Kwasi, can I ask you a word about Labour? There is a potential flashpoint coming up for Sir Keir Starmer over the ceasefire vote put forward by the SNP. Your view on the amendment that's put forward,
sure,
and your view on where Sir Keir finds himself and his stance over it.
Look, he's in a very difficult place because it's obvious that if you look at the Labour Party, if you look at the left broadly, there is a significant number of people in the left who are 100% behind Palestine. 100%. And for many, actually, of them, this is one of their top issues. And of course, what he can't do is relive the Corbyn years, where the party was accused of anti-Semitism and being certainly anti-Israel. And so he's got to straddle these two positions. And it's going to be very difficult for him.
And if people do rebel, what does he need to do?
I'm not sure. I mean, he's shown quite a tough hand. I mean, he chucked Corbyn out of the party. He's chucked people out of his shadow cabinet or what have you. And maybe he'll do the same. But of course, in politics, it's always about the numbers. We don't know, as of this morning, how many Labour MPs are going to vote for the ceasefire or not. And if it's a big rebellion, as far as he's concerned, it makes it harder for him to be the tough guy.
Last couple of questions. Will you be watching Nigel Farage in the jungle?
I barely brought myself to watch Hancock, so I'm not sure. I'm going to be watching Nigel. I think I saw clips of Hancock in the background. I'll probably watch a bit of it, but I don't. Whatever they eat, kangaroo bulls or whatever it is. I'm not into that.
What's going to happen at the next election? Is he a threat?
So my biggest fear, because everyone forgets the fact that in 2019 we got a majority of 80, but that was helped, I think, largely by the fact that the Brexit Party didn't even stand. Reform didn't stand. They pulled down all their candidates. And I remember in my constituency there were, I think, 4 or 5 candidates, and none of them were Brexiteers apart from me. The worry next time is that you have Brexit Party candidates, or Reform I think it's called now, on the ballot who take thousands of votes from us, potentially. That's the fear. Now, I don't think it's insurmountable. I think we can perhaps get to a position where they're less of a threat. But at the moment, that's something we have to consider.
And what of you? Are you standing at the next?
I've been readopted, and I'm supporting the Prime Minister and hoping to.
So you're standing at the next general election?
To continue to be an MP for...
So just to remind the listeners, of course, you're Conservative MP for Spelthorne. You have a majority, I understand, of around 18,000.
Yeah.
Greater majorities than that have been picked off over the last few months.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're not... I mean, I think there are very few safe seats. I mean, there are probably a handful of seats in Essex or Lincolnshire, or... I mean, I wouldn't hate to hazard where these places are, but there are a handful of seats that the Tories are going to certainly win. But I think it's going to be a very competitive election.
And I know we're in the realms of conjecture, but if the Tories get the pasting that some suggest, that's the end for Mr Sunak, isn't it?
I think he'll probably go, even if we lose, quite narrowly. I think people may want to move on, but it's up to him, really, and up to the party. I mean, I remember John Major just walked off in '97. I don't think Rishi will do that. But I think people will want to refresh the party, and it's probably easier to do that with a new leader. But this is all massively conjectural.
Has Suella Braverman enhanced her chances to be the future leader of the party?
I don't think she'll be the leader of the party. I mean, I don't know what game she's playing or if it is a game, but I think she She's kind of a Marmite politician in many ways. And I think the party will probably go for someone a little bit more conciliatory.
Finally, we're just over an hour away from the Rwanda decision,
Yeah.
which of course was also referenced by the Prime Minister, the inflation figures that we've talked about, Kwasi, and the Rwanda decision. Let's look at two scenarios. But firstly, if it goes against the government, what do they do then?
My understanding is that they'll try and push on with it.
What
I
does
don't
that
know how, or what the legal basis would be. This is a broader issue, and I've sort of spoken about this in the past. Essentially, we're living in a world where courts have more and more jurisdiction and power over essentially what are political decisions. And I think the government will try and push back.
ECHR?
ECHR, I haven't heard what James Cleverly is saying about that. I mean, obviously that's
We don't
something
know.
for him.
But if there was a sense that the United Kingdom should seek to leave it, would you support that?
Look, in negotiations, I've always thought you should leave everything on the table. There's no point just ruling things out if you don't have to rule them out. And I think that's something that can be considered.
All right. I don't know how you are in Spelthorne, but I'll tell you, Piers in Kent says, at last a politician who answers a question, bring back Kwasi. So
Well, that's very charming. I mean, and I have to say to Piers, just quick, it's much easier as a backbencher.
Yeah, of course.
When you're in government, and you've interviewed me
Many times.
And you've got to hold the line.
Yeah.
Whereas, and it's unfair, I think, to judge cabinet ministers and ministers on that, because they have to have a collective view, and as individuals, they might not necessarily agree with that view. And people might say, well, they've got to resign, but then you'd have people resigning all the time. There's a whole range of things the government does, and as a minister, you have to be you're tied into everything.